Hi everybody, this is Todd Geis with Geis Interactive. I've got a little video here I want to share with you today about a couple different topics and how they're coming together in kind of an interesting way. I've been talking a lot about Modular FileMaker, as some of you know. This is a website we started earlier this year to try to inspire and encourage people to build small chunks of modular FileMaker code that we can swap around and share and make better as a community. And I've got a little story that kind of illustrates that, along with an interesting technical idea, which I thought would be interesting to share, along with this whole mix here. So Modular FileMaker has come a long way. We've got over 24 modules now, and you can visit the website here, modularfilemaker.org, and you can see it up there. You can check it out. There's lots of good stuff there. Two of the modules that have been there a while are one's called HyperList, and HyperList has been built. Well, I've kind of organized it and got it together into a module, but it is through the input of at least 8 or 9 different people that we've been able to produce this thing. And what it does is it gives you a way, with a single script, that gives you a way to capture the values inside of any field over across an entire found set, whatever the found set may be. So it doesn't have to be anything specific as how you get to that found set. As long as you have a found set, HyperList can gather the record IDs. So it's really useful for virtual list techniques and for other things. And it has gotten really, really fast. We can now do 200,000 records in 1 to 3 seconds, depending on the computer. So it's very, very fast. Most of the techniques that have been around for a while to gather record IDs would never resolve 200,000 records. It just wouldn't work. The curve on that time over records over found set goes vertical. Eventually, it's exponential, and eventually it goes vertical, and it would never resolve. But this technique gets around that, and it's really, really fast. The other module that's part of the story today is MasterDetail, and that is a good use of a virtual list. It's very common UI. We've got the portal on the left with the records that show all the records in the found set, and then the detail view that is sitting, that has the record that you're actually on. In order to do this, we needed to gather the found set of IDs, so that's what HyperList comes into. So as I said, these have been developed in the community with lots of different input. And about 3 months ago, we got some great ideas from Donovan Chan at Beeswax about how to improve HyperList, and we did. We improved it. It's about 3 times faster than it was earlier this year. And then we got another idea from Daniel Wood about sort of a different way to use HyperList. Instead of using it to gather the primary key of the table that you're interested in, he used it on an unstored calculation that references get record ID. Now, when I first heard this, I said, whoa, 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 you can't use record ID. Get record ID is not a good, it's not a good primary key because it may change. And that's true. If you clone a file and re-import the records, then that record ID is going to change. So it's not something that you can rely on for a primary key. It's not something that you can be sure will never change, because if you do imports, if you do a clone and you do import or you do imports, you could run the risk of changing those values. So it's not something you can use for a primary key in terms of relationships, but you can use it here. So let's take a look at MasterDetail. So here it is. And we already sort of pointed it out, but it's fairly obvious. Let's look at the relationship graph here quickly. So on the graph, you can see we have, really this is the relationship that matters. We're going from this ID field in the virtual list table called MasterDetail rows. And for those of you who don't know, haven't heard about virtual lists yet, do an internet search for virtual lists in FileMaker. You'll find lots of details about it. It's a great technique, very, very powerful. And so we're going from the ID field to the ID field of the context table, which is the one that we're displaying here as our sample data. So that's primary key to the, it's the ID shows up here as the primary key, and that is connected to the primary key in the context table, and that's what lets us display our data over here on the left-hand column for all of the records in that set. So that's normal. That's how we had been doing it. And you'd see up in the left-hand corner there on the screen that we have the HyperList time listed out there. And so when this was just run, it took 5 seconds to gather the record IDs from 80,000 records. 80,000 records is a fairly large found set. It's bigger than anything I would recommend you display to your users in a virtual list anyway, for lots of reasons. 80,000 records just aren't that interesting to scroll. You're going to want to filter that found set down, but for this test I wanted a really large, big record set. So I have 80,000 records in here, and HyperList is gathering those records, I should say, over a LAN. This is not, this is running on a FileMaker server, and so it's running over a LAN, not a WAN, but a LAN. It's running here at our place, and so it's finding and pulling down 80,000 records, creating a big giant list of IDs, which we can see right here. Huge, very long. Those are long list of IDs, 80,000 of them. In fact, and that's going to take a while. Oh, there it goes, resolved pretty quickly. So that works. 5 seconds is not bad. I mean, I don't think it's bad for being over the LAN and for 80,000 records. But we can make it even faster if instead of using here the primary key to make this relationship, we could use just the record ID. Because the record ID isn't going to change from the time we gather these records to the time that we're displaying them. There's no imports and cloning that's going to be happening there. So it's unlikely that the record ID is going to change. So in this case, because we're using the record ID, it only has to stay the same within the same session. It's perfectly safe to use in this scenario. And so Daniel's insight was that if you try to gather all the IDs of a stored version of the get record IDs field, it's gonna be take just as long as any other stored field. But if you pull down a list of all of the unstored, or if you use an unstored calculation field, it's much faster. And so that's what we're going to do here. Okay, so I've added 2 new fields here. I've got get record ID and get record ID unstored. So really the only difference is one of the calculations is indexed and stored, and one of them isn't. So what we're going to do is we are going to tell HyperList to use the unstored version of that calculation as the field we're going to gather, and we're going to use the stored version as the field we're going to point to in the relationship graph. So what we're going to do is just really change this here to the stored version. So that way our relationship will be valid, because we need a stored field on the right-hand side of the relationship. So that goes from ID to the stored version, and then we're going to tell HyperList here in layout mode, HyperList, all we have to do is switch its field that it's looking at right here, and we're going to use the unstored version. So when I go back to browse mode and let this resolve, there it's going to go, and now it only took 3 seconds to resolve that same thing. So by switching from a stored value to an unstored value, we were able to reduce the time that HyperList takes to gather 80,000 records almost in half. So from 5 seconds to 3 seconds. So that's really the story I wanted to tell today. Again, another improvement in the HyperList MasterDetail story, and really it's an improvement that comes about because we are sharing this stuff on Modular FileMaker, and because all this stuff is up here with example files and test files that people can use to try to improve this stuff, we actually get great suggestions back, and we get great code back that helps us to increase the speed. So I would say that from the time that I first published HyperList, there's probably been a 5 to 10-fold increase in the speed because of community involvement. And that's really what Modular FileMaker is all about, and I'd like to encourage you to check out the site and to look at the modules there and to try them out, test them, try to make them better, and just see what you can come up with. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.